جنوبين كل يوم موت موت لمتين يا اخوانا نقول سلام سلام متين السلام ده يجي يلدونا في هروب ونربي في هروب وكمان نموت في هروب لكل جنوبي يموت قطعة من جنوبنا بيموت نجري لمتين ولوين ندي يالنا وندي أرواحنا وندي دمنا فضل شنو تاني أنا تعبان
أنا ما شعبان لكن أنا بس تعبان أنا ما فرحان لكن أنا بس فتران أنا ما سكران لكن أنا بس كسران أنا ما كسران لكن أنا بس ساقان
وهدو سلام مفروض يكون مفهوم يا في الجنوب ده سلا يكون حاجة مواطني ما يشوف يا بنية بونجوز يابا حبوبة حاجات ما بنفع في الجنوب ده قبلية جوا عنصرية جوا كراهية جوا قلب كبير جوا فساد جوا نغمة حاجات الناس جوا دو 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 بويا صوت باشا في جيدة باب البازوكا جري جري لبتين جنوبيين قاعدين في كامبالا نيروبي UN أمريكا أستراليا سبين أي روكو دا دنيا جنوبي في ليو بلتانا طالع no wisdom why sound the gun redundant like a hit song I'm feeling so tired أنا تعبان
أنا تعبان من جري جري أنا تعبان من كاتولو أنا تعبان من كايمانتيان أنا تعبان من مشاكل تعبان لمي تاني في جري أنا كمان في جري تلقى ملاوتها وسوا سكبت ناجيان أنا تعبان مشاكل كربو بلد تعال النور بيرفع بلد
موت كل يوم في تلفون جنوب تانينا كربو نينا مالو دوم كوبو أكو ياو كاتولو أنا تعبان في شنو
أنا مواتي جنوبي بسي كل يوم أنا كيكيني فيكو في قلبي أنا تعبان جري كل يوم أنا تعبان كاتولو كل يوم أنا تعبان
من جري جري أنا تعبان من كاتولو أنا تعبان من كايمانتيان أنا تعبان من مشاكل
حياتنا جنوبي بقى كلام بتموت وفقا يوم يحفر شيء بتا يكون بيتين في سقا لمتين ماما بيكوري لمتين بابا بيكوري لمتين تلقى بيكوري أنا تباني لساوين كيموتوا لي ويال كيموتوا لي موي أنا كيكوبو ودوم كيكوبو Think about the youth, think about the future
أنا تعبان جري بيكا تلا ساكافا أنا تعبان حياة إنسان بيكا ركيز أنا تعبان سيان بيكا كلا سوناستا أنا تعبان حياة كمان تا إنسان بيكا ركيز
أنا تعبان من جري جري أنا تعبان من كاتولو أنا تعبان من كايمانتيان أنا تعبان من مشاكل
أنا تعبان
من كاتولو
أنا أيان
من جري جري
أنا جان أسان كده أنا داي سلام
هوغو
أنا ما شعبان لكن أنا بس تعبان Listen to our prayers. Ana ma farhan, lakin ana best for the run.
Viewers, welcome to the Indigenous Media Live Show. This is the program that today focus on the intercommunal conflict in South Sudan. As we all know, South Sudan gained its independence in 2011. Since then, the country has gone through political instability as well as intercommunal conflict. The insecurity and also the instability has made the population of South Sudan vulnerable. Some researchers point out that at least 7.5 million needs humanitarian assistance. There are also some warning that the country faces acute food shortages and 6 millions are in need of food assistance, or 6 million faces acute food shortages. More than 4 million South Sudanese population also are internally displaced and also are refugees in the neighboring country. Elites in the past has been using limited resources to support militias activities, and these militias activities are used to attack civilians. There has never been any meaningful disarmament policy to bring these militia activities under control. And also there has not been any effort to understand the root causes of this conflict and also the issues that this community in South Sudan are facing. So today I'm joined by a distinguished guest, General Lemi Lomuro. General Lemi is an expert in security analysis, and he's also part of the struggle, the liberation struggle that led to the current independence in South Sudan. Before I invite my guest to come and share his knowledge and also expertise on security situations in South Sudan, today is a day of indigenous people, and the indigenous media, as part of the indigenous peoples, on behalf of the Ethiopian indigenous people, the indigenous people in Gambela, we would like to take this opportunity to congratulate more than 470 million indigenous peoples worldwide on this specific day in their struggle to protect their land, in their struggle to protect the environment, in their struggle to protect their identity, and their struggle to protect their culture. Having said that, I would want to welcome my guest, Lemi Lomuro. Lemi, welcome to Indigenous Media Show.
Thank you, Nika, for having me.
Lemi, in a few minutes, I think for those people who are watching, for those people who do not know you, can I give you a minute or two to introduce yourself to the viewers and to the audience?
That is only in order, Nyakao. My name is Lemi Logbongalomura. I am an army officer in the SPLA. Uh, I have been with the SPLA from the beginning, from the inception in 1983 up to today. I'm still an active officer in the Sudan People's Liberation Army, which is now South Sudan Defense Forces. Currently, I am out of South Sudan. I am in the United Kingdom on a study leave, which has taken me now over 2 years. And I hope to finish that, then I will be able to return back to South Sudan. So I do a number of things, including studying and analyzing security issues, not only in South Sudan but in East Africa in general. And so that is what I do for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Lemi. Gentlemen, I am aware that, as your introduction clearly stated, you are part and parcels of the liberation struggle, and you also hold very high key positions in the government. How much did you think that this issue of intercommunal conflict was a problem? Was it during the liberation struggle? Or if not at that time, when do you think that this intercommunal conflict has become a problem, and why?
Thank you, Mr. Nyikau. Intercommunal violence or problems in South Sudan is a historical issue that has been there from time immemorial. Traditionally, the people of South Sudan, who are largely pastoralists, have always engaged in intercommunal violence for many, many years. So yes, this has been going on even during the War of Liberation. There have always been intercommunal fighting between different communities, different pastoralists, mainly pastoralist communities, different groups, different clans, and indeed even families. So yes, that has always been a problem. I cannot tell you exactly when it started, but I want to say that traditionally has always been there, all through the war and up to now. So I cannot say specifically that intercommunal fighting has a particular time frame when it started to become a problem. It has always been a problem. What I can say later on is that there are certain factors that have only helped to worsen it in the recent past, particularly during and after the War of Liberation. There are certain things that happened that were able to exacerbate these intercommunal fightings. So yes, they have always been there, and it never started yesterday, not today, not during the war, but it has from time immemorial. Our people have always been fighting among themselves for many, many years.
But Lemi, I think the scale and the dynamics of this conflict has changed considerably, if I may say so. Yes, it is a very long uh, issue that has existed in the liberation, in the country, among the communities, because of resources, because of some other issues that we may later on talk about. What was the strategy of the SPLM during the liberation struggle to bring this under control, to achieve the objective and the goals of the liberation?
First, it may be important for our guests before we can talk about the SPLA's own strategies on managing this intercommunal violence. I think it will be important to look at the main causes. What are the main reasons why people go to continue to raid one another, fight and kill themselves for a long, long period of time without changing direction? And in my view, there are a number of reasons, and these are reasons that are not necessarily based on my own finding, but reasons that have been given by various analysts and specialists on Sudanese issues and many others. One of the fundamental reasons why there has always been intercommunal fighting is cattle rustling. This cattle rustling is driven by a number of factors. One is the issue of dowry, where young people will always go out to look for animals in order to secure bright wealth, because they need, whenever they need to marry, they must pay cows, and so getting these cows has not always been easy. So they traditionally go out and hunt for these animals from their neighbors, from their distant neighbors, and that has been going on for a long time. It is also important to note that it is not only these pastoralists in South Sudan who go out and conduct cattle rustling for the purpose of marriage and many other purposes, but in the East African region, actually, you find that a lot of the people who are pastoralists do engage in cattle rustling. The Turkana, for example, incurves into South Sudan to raid cattle. The Toposa on the Sudanese side also go into Kenya and conduct cattle rustling. The Karamojong in Uganda, the Masai, the Tugen, then the Murle cut across to Ethiopia and Kenya, the Nyangatom. So yes, this practice has been there. Mainly conventionally, it is believed to be because over time, generations always want to secure more cattle for dowry. That is one factor that creates communal fighting. The second reason, the second cause is the struggle over resources, which is mainly made of grazing land and water, because these pastoralists must always find where to keep and maintain their animals. And during dry seasons, most of these people move to different areas, whether this is along the Nile or across the borders, in search of water and grass for their animals. And in doing so, they come into conflict with some of the rival communities who too also want to have this access for their own livelihoods. That creates a lot of problems. And the third element that comes with that is the fact that once people are killed by a particular community or a group of people, then the communities will go down to seek revenge. They will go and pay back for the losses by looking for some individuals within their rival communities and kill them. And this is called revenge killing, which is also emanates from this cattle rustling that has been going on for a long time. Now, the third reason is that, or the third cause of communal fighting, in my view, is the advent of the AK-47. Traditionally, our people have used, they've always used spears, they've used bows and arrows for fighting. But as late as the 90s, when a lot of guns got into the country and found their way into the hands of the civil population, the pastoralists took advantage of this and made it an approach. Just a minute, somebody is calling me. Yeah, so a lot of guns got into people's hands, and this influx of the AK-47 changed the dynamics dramatically. That has increased the number of casualties on both sides, those who are attacking and those who are being attacked. Both of them are armed AK-47, and so the results has been very, very disastrous. That's why we are talking of thousands and thousands of people who have died in this kind of fighting that has now been made worse by the presence of the new weapons. That's AK-47. Now, the other reason is that there is political manipulation. Particularly after the independence, a lot of politicians have found it convenient to use their communities against the other in order to gain. So people, for example, go there and encourage their local people to go and attack others. You may be aware that way back in 1991, when Dr. Riek Machar, who is one of our leaders, currently he is now appointed the first vice president, when he rebelled and broke away from the SPLM, Dr. Riek Machar went and mobilized the entire Nuer population and gave them a designation. He called them White Army. And this White Army went on a rampage, killing thousands and thousands of people, mainly from the Dinkas from Bor. And this was not just because they wanted to gain their land, their cows. No, this was purely a political move by Dr. Riek Machar that was designed to not only destroy, but destroy and loot the people, because this civil population, the Nuer population, who are now known as the White Army, were told that you go and kill anybody and take all the war booty that you will get in the front line or in those villages will be yours. The entire Nuer population moved all the way, clearing the Dinka areas of Bor down to the borders with Equatoria. That was a political movement, and it is one of the fundamental factors that has always caused these conflicts. Up to today, politicians continue to play with their communities to cause these conflicts for their political gains. The other issue is that of armed groups, which is associated with the politics, because the armed groups or rebels or insurgents are literally engineered by politics. And these same politicians, most of whom lose out in maybe in election, or if they are not given political appointments in government, they will go and organize their communities and begin to wage war against the communities that are suspected to be either supporters of the government or where some leaders who are their opponents are believed to have come. And so you can see that this political manipulation of the communities extends far and wide, including into the recruitment of rebel groups against other groups. Finally, and fundamentally, in my opinion, one of the causes of all these problems is the absence of a state, absence a serious or modern statehood. To this day, South Sudan, and I will elaborate on this one later on, more on this, I honestly want to believe that people in South Sudan exist in traditional primitive enclaves and communities. They do not know themselves. If you ask a Zande in Yambio, for example, about the Jie in Kasangor, they will not tell you. They don't know anything about them. They don't know anything about the Kasipo. They even never heard anything about the Anuak, for example, who are very far away in the borders with Ethiopia. The thing with the people in northern Baragazal, they have very limited knowledge about what is happening, for example, in Tori, in Seratanya, in Ikotos, in all those areas. So our people exist in a traditional, primitive state of nature where there is no state. The state has no control. There is no monopoly over control of power or violence in the country. That lack of firm state is one of the fundamental reasons why people behave in their natural freedom. So, human beings by definition are free, and so since they are free, they decide whatever they want to do for as long as there is no power, there is no authority over them to guide them on what they should do and what they should not do. So yes, absence of state, the lack of a concrete modern state to govern, to control, to direct people is one of the fundamental reasons why there are so many intercommunal fightings. Because very many people in South Sudan do not see themselves as one people. They don't believe that they are related or they are interrelated in one way or the other. And because they are not, there is nothing to connect them. For example, there are roads, nothing. People walk on foot. People live in the literal ancient enclaves. And so they believe that that is only their territory. The Murle, for example, believe that actually Pibor is the center of South Sudan and that all the cows in South Sudan are theirs. That the rest only happen to have looted. And so it is their traditional and historical duty to go and reclaim all these animals back to Pibor. That's why the Murle go, they attack the Anuak, they attack the Nuer, they attack the Dinka, they attack the Toposa, they attack the Karo in Juba, and so all directions, because the idea of belonging to an entity in the state does not exist in the minds of our South Sudanese. And I will elaborate later more on that. So what you have is a kind of an artificial state. Yes, we talk of South Sudan, but it is more or less an artificial state. One writer calls it improvised state because it does not exist in the real sense. It does not manifest in legal terms for the people to know that there is a government in place, there is a state in place that is responsible for their security so that they don't have to take security in their own hands. Now, having stated all these reasons, and I think there are a lot of them which you can list, coming back to your question about what the SPLM did, I think the SPLM tried their best to control this cattle rustling. Number one, when the SPLM decided to, particularly in the SPLA administered areas, there was a serious attempt to impose law where criminals, including those people who engineer cattle raiding and pasturing and intercommunal fightings, were punished. I am aware of people who are subjected to our own local laws in the bush, and they faced justice, including execution. And that helped to reduce cattle raiding during the war. Also, one of the things that the SPLA did was to organize what we call National Territorial Army. NTA, National Territorial Army. This National Territorial Army were people made of people from their original areas, where they were given some weapons to protect their communities. So, and because by then there were only few AK-47s in the hands of the civilians, so this NTA or National Territorial Army were able to secure their own communities because it is a national agenda. It was a national program that covered all the liberated areas, all the way from the Boma area to Kapoita to Yei to Rumbeg, Tonje, up to Bargazal. We had this National Territorial Army who became responsible, like the police of the Sudan under the SPLM, who helped to mitigate. However, this did not completely stop the practice. Certain incidences of cattle raiding occurred. It continued to happen, and the SPLA have always tried to do their best to reduce it, but they were not able to completely do away with it. And I cannot claim that there was any success by the in completely eradicating communal fighting. Otherwise, if it was the case, then by now we would have seen a change in the attitudes and the actions of the people. But the SPLA did their best, but they were not able to completely stop cattle rustling. So that is my answer to your question. I think I've made it long, but because I thought it was necessary to enlist some of the fundamental causes that always lead to these kind of problems in the country.
Well, thank you, Lemi. I think this is expected. This is an issue that is always in the minds and in the hearts of everybody. Why exactly this intercommunal fightings and cattle raiding and so forth is getting out of control because SPLM as a liberation struggle must have a strategy in place to control such kind of activities. And of course, you guys have already achieved the goal of independence of South Sudan. Now, in contrast to the strategies of SPLA to control the scale of this intercommunal conflict, what has been the role of the authorities in power? Is it the state failurity that brought all this into a situation where it is uncontrollable? And what do you think they can do to achieve, as someone who has been in the liberation struggle and also in your expertise in security analysis?
This is a very important point, Mikau, and then it directly touches on what I had attempted to state earlier on the issue of the state. My personal opinion is that at the moment, South Sudan exists in vacuum, in the state of nature. There is no state, there is no authority that is in full control of the entity that is defined as South Sudan. South Sudan could be described as an entity in transition, transitioning from that vacuum, from that state of nature where people act according to their instincts, in accordance with the law of nature, to a nation state which is yet to come. Remember what I said earlier, that people in South Sudan exist in communal enclaves. People do not know themselves. And the government that came as a result of the long war in South Sudan has not been able to complete that transition from a vacuum state or a state of nature where the rule or the law of nature is what governs, meaning communities can organize and attack others, and you will never hear that the government has been able to do anything or punish or hold people accountable, because the government doesn't have that power. The government is not in control of the tools of power in the country, which are guns. The government has no monopoly over control of violence in the country. So people behave in a traditional manner where a clan, a tribe, a community can always come together, mobilize themselves, and now that they have access to guns, they simply agree to go and attack others. And the government will do nothing. The so-called government will not do nothing because the government is not there. The government, to me, exists only in Juba. But even in Juba, the government has no control over what happens in society. Because, as we said earlier, since the advent of the independence, taking from there, but even before that, before we come to independence, prior to independence, there was only one factor that was able to mobilize South Sudanese, and that's why, and that was what made it possible for us to fight as one people until we gain independence. And this was the historical malpractice by our enemies, the Arabs in the north, where they traded, they hunted on us as slaves for many, many years. And because this exercise of the slavery and the mistreatment of the South Sudanese was not only limited to one community, all communities were affected. And so that made it possible for people to be able to mobilize their hatred and anger and grievances against the Arabs. Those are the only, that was the only factor that made it possible for people to come together and fought the Arabs to finish. Now, when that job is finished, and South Sudan became independent, and now that brings me now to the point of the independence post-war. People returned back to their original way of life. For example, our brothers, the Dinkas, regrouped and began to emphasize Dinkanism rather than South Sudan. Our brothers, the Nuer, decided to regroup and decided now to talk in terms of the Nuer and not South Sudan. React's rebels at some point are 100% Nuer. And that prompted the government, the so-called government in Juba, also to go and recruit the Dinkas. They recruited all their own tribesmen from Matianganyor to Galweng to Chitweng, all this from Dinkas, and none from any other community in the south. And then now we have even new vocabularies creeping in from individuals who feel aggrieved, like the Equatorian, for example. A new identity has been created known as Equatorian. I am yet to know exactly whether this is a political organization or it is a geographical categorization of the people, because in Equatoria you also have a multitude of communities, just like they are in Upper Nile and Bargaza. But this has come up in response to these groupings of the Dinkas, the Chulu, the Nuer, everybody going their way. We have even forgotten that at one point we were all victims of a common enemy known as the Arabs. So that is all gone. And it tells me that actually, after the so-called independence of the territory, the South Sudanese government, the so-called government, has not been able to transition or actually improve on what was established during the war. During the war, the SPLA was able to mobilize this anger of all the various communities in South Sudan, and indeed instilled in the minds of the people that we were one people, that we were all, not only South Sudanese, we are all Sudanese, that we were fighting for a new Sudan. And people believed in it. That's why people fought, although, of course, there were some differences here and there. But the current government failed to exploit that unity that was created. And because it was young, we can say it was also artificial in a form, because it had just been invented by the SPLA, and so it could not hold for a long time. Now, after independence, people have melted back into their own localities. And since then, since the independence up to today, that transition has continued to go on. People have continued to live as communities, as tribes, as clans. You now have over 100 tribal organizations. Every community now has their own organization, including in the universities. You now have tribal organizations in the university. University of Bargazal, for example, will have students from Equatoria, and within Equatoria, if there are 5 Latuga boys, they will call them Latuga Association. If there are 10, 15, 20 Karo boys, they will call them Karo Association. Within the Karo, they will divide themselves. The Mundari will say this is a Mundari student organization. The Bari will say we have a Bari student organization. Pojulu student organization. The same thing with all the Dinkas. All of them, all of us have gone down into deep tribal division, which is a clear manifestation of the absence of a state, a nation state that should be able to provide security and guidance for the country. So South Sudan is not able to finish that transition, and because so many things have not happened, including most important ones. For example, the government has not been able to sit down and agree with the people of South Sudan so that we can be able to define our status as a people. How do we want to live as South Sudanese? How do we want to move on now that we are able to decisively defeat the Arabs? We have done so with them. Now we are a people. So the first question that should have come in the mind of any prudent government should have been to call for a national constitutional conference, ask the people to define themselves. How do people want to govern themselves? Remember, as a community of people, there are problems. There are people with different ideas within the country. There are those who want their own regions. For example, the Equatorians want to have an Equatorial region of their own. And I believe Bargazal wants to have the Bargazal region of their own, whether they call them federal regions or whatever, autonomous regions. All this should have been addressed and defined in law. That has not happened. And because that has not happened, then society has continued to behave in the natural way. Meaning everybody is free. Everybody is at liberty to do whatever they want to do, because no one will be held accountable, because there is no supreme authority that can hold people accountable. So the absence of state, in my opinion, is one fundamental issue that has led to all these problems. Because if there was a fully established state emanating from consensus or agreement of the people, what the political philosophers like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes will call it a leviathan, where society should sit down and agree and reach a contract that a certain group of elected or chosen people should be in charge of their security. where society will then be able to surrender their security to this group of people called government, coming out completely from the anarchy, from the state of nature, so that the government takes over their security. So that if anybody rapes another person, then the government, it is the duty of the government to hold that person or that group or that community, that clan, that tribe accountable. At the moment, there is none of the kind. So I can tell you, and this is my personal conviction, that South Sudan remains, if I may borrow from Professor Miamingi, that it remains an improvised state. It is by name because it is registered in the United Nations as a state, but practically on the ground, there is no state. There is no nation state on the ground. People of South Sudan exist in nations and they even don't know themselves. They treat themselves as strangers in different parts of the country, as I explained earlier. So that is a fundamental problem. And until South Sudan completes that transition of the state of anarchy to a modern nation state through consultation, through conversation, through constitutional process that defines the position of the South Sudanese people, South Sudan will continue to suffer until that is met, until that contract is reached between the people on how they should be governed, on how why the government should take over responsibility of their security. If all those don't happen, I can assure you we will still continue to have the same problem that is affecting South Sudan, and it will not stop because people are free to do whatever they want to do, and as long as there is no accountability.
Well, thank you, Lemi. Social contract is a very important concept in the relationship between the state and the people that they govern. The role in this context, the role of a state in trying to control the intercommunal conflict is paramount important. But there are also a number of actors, including religious groups, including civil society, community leaders, and elders. And their roles also is very important. What have they been doing to ensure that the government is brought to accountability and ensure that such kind of intercommunal conflict, because South Sudanese are brothers. As you clearly said, they don't know that they have a common enemy now called poverty, security, and underdevelopment. So what do you say about that?
I think the issues of the role of the religious groups or civil society in general has been made impossible. Yes, they do exist. Yes, we have these groups, and I believe they have been doing their part in trying to mitigate some of the problems that are happening. And for example, 3 years ago, this religious group were able to bring a temporary pacification of the Murle problems when they were fighting. They are fighting the government. Unfortunately, both civil society and religious group can only be effective when there is a formally established nation state. It is, in my view, very difficult for religious groups and the civil society to impose law and order, for example, in society, brother Nyakao. They can try to persuade people, but persuasion is only limited to a certain level because there is no supreme law, there is no overall authority in the name of the state that can impose some of these norms on the people. So the church, like every individual South Sudanese who is conscious of what should have happened in the country, is crying loud for solutions to be found. But for as long as you have that vacuum, for as long as you have society living in a state of anarchy, where it is only the fittest that survive, then the society, the church will not be able to do anything. The church, for example, cannot go and then tell the Murle, put down their guns and stop fighting. Don't go and raid people. Don't go and kidnap children. Because the Murles know that one of their ways to survive is to go and raid cattle, raid children, and bring them to their own, for their own survival. The state cannot. And just to confirm that, to confirm my own hypothesis that actually there is no credible state that is in charge of the country. Just 2 weeks ago, when the Murle went to attack the Nuer in the low Nuer areas, where so many people were killed, I think in the hundreds, the government, the so-called government, decided to send a delegation headed by one of their vice presidents called Waniga. And because they have no authority, because they have no power, what Waniga could do was to go and kneel down in front of the Murle. Imagine a whole vice president kneeling down and begging the Murle not to go and raid other people. I believe that act of kneeling down was designed to appeal to their emotions. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in a situation where there is anarchy, where there is total anarchy, where you can only survive by killing and taking from other people. So, but again, it was a clear demonstration of lack of authority, lack of power in the country. It is a clear demonstration of the absence of authority, absence of state power. Because to this day, there is no single South Sudanese who will come and tell me and call me on this telephone and say, Logbonga, this number of ring leaders or people who orchestrated the cattle raid in such an area have all been arrested and they are being subjected to the court of law. Nothing. People raid, they kill themselves, whether this is in Jongole or in Bargazal, particularly in the areas of Bargazal, and then the Nuer Murle side of the territories. They conduct it as a normal business, and nobody, because they know they will never be held accountable. Nobody will ask them. And because they say they do not have the authority. And gradually, actually, what I see is that communities are becoming more and more stronger. They are more militarily organized. They are actually better equipped. And they are challenging those who claim to be the authority in Juba without necessarily imposing their authority. So it is a situation where if it is not addressed, and of course that is not going to be easy, because addressing it would require some of the processes that I stated earlier, including consultation with the people, beginning with the definition of our own country. We must know where we have come from and we must know where we are going. And then people arrive at that level where they will be able to form consensus and then make a contract. So it's a long process. But as we speak now, it is regrettable that people of South Sudan will continue to kill themselves until that transition is complete, until people come to their senses and sit down, agree on how to move forward. So that is a brief answer that I think I have regarding that particular last question.
Thank you,
Church,
Lemi.
the church and the civil society are powerless. They are just like any other community. They are behaving because churches and the civil societies are considered as part of the modern society. But modernity in a state of anarchy where nature governs, the law of nature governs, that do not work. It cannot function.
Yes, let's be more practical. I think you mentioned about this issue of the Murle attacking the Nuer attacking Murle, the Murle attacking Dinka, and this is a very common problem in Upper Nile, in Jonglei, and also in Greater Pibor, between Murle, Dinka, Nuer, and Murle. And often what is being cited is the fact that this practice of child abduction and also cattle raiding is a major concern. In this particular context, how does this traditional practice affect the vision, the aspiration of the liberation struggle? And also, this particular practice of the Murle and other groups in the region has also affected the region Gambela across the border. And how is this implications on the diplomatic relationship between Ethiopia and South Sudan?
If I followed you very clearly, I think these are two questions. One is the impact of these activities between the Murle, the Nuer, and the Dinka on the vision of creating a new state. And then secondly is the regional impact of such a practice. Now,
Correct.
Firstly, these communities, as I said earlier, have either forgotten about why they fought, or maybe they think the mission is accomplished. That is, South Sudan has become independent, and therefore people withdraw back to their own local traditional ways of life. The Murle, for many, many years, like the Nuer and the Dinka, have always raided themselves. And since the advent of the independence, the SPLM government, that be, has not been able to come out with a new strategy on how to address this communal fighting that has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the impact definitely is negative. It is an exacerbation of what has been happening over time in history, because this liberation and the independence has not been able to bring any change. And actually, I can say that for the Murle, the Nuer, and the Dinka, who are traditionally on their own throats every time, independence really makes little sense for them. Because when we are talking about independence, when we are talking about the vision of the SPLM, we are assuming that we have a state that is supreme to all of us, and therefore things to do with vision and ideologies of such an organization are over and above all of us, and that they help to govern all of us. But the interests, the local and practical interests of the Murle and the Nuer and the Dinka are community-based. They directly affect their own livelihoods. For example, the Murle have a tradition of going out to abduct children because they believe in their cultures that they must abduct children in order to increase, in order to complement their own populations, because they need more manpower for further cattle rustling. The Nuer can also go out in order to either secure animals for dowries or for whatever reason, or they go out to fight because they struggle over the limited resources of land and grass and water. You see, the same thing applies to the Dinkas. And all this have happened even after independence, yet the government is not able to act. I think, if I recall very well, there was only one campaign where the government in Juba decided they will try to disarm the Nuer. That was 2011 to 2012. And can you imagine, in that campaign, many people died. It was estimated that over 4,000 people died in that war, and because they resisted this disarmament, they could not accept their people to be disarmed, and so it ended up in a war between the SPLA and the Nuer, and many people died. So the government withdrew, and since then I've never heard of another disarmament until just last month, when we are told that again the SPLA has decided now to go to Barghazal and try to carry out disarmament of the communities. But all this without proper strategy to address these issues. The communities that are always engaged in this kind of problems will continue to suffer. Just last week alone, the Nuers and the Dinkas decided that they wanted to revenge or to attack the Murles because of what happened 2 months ago. Remember, 2 months ago, the Murle went and attacked the Nuer and they killed more than 200 people. Now, just 2 weeks ago, these two communities found convenience in agreeing, because they too are enemies themselves. But they decided this time that since they have one common enemy whom they regard as the Murle, they decided to combine themselves to go and attack the Murle. And that led to a serious disaster. Just yesterday, when I received a report where there were close to more than 30 dead bodies of these combined people of the Murle, I mean the Dinkas and the Nuer, who had gone to Pibor to fight the Murle. You see? And yet, up to now, we are not able to hear what the government is going to do, because the government has no authority over them. So the Dinkas went with the Murle, they attacked the Murle, and the Murle repulsed them, and both sides losing people in their hundreds. And that's it. Tomorrow we'll wait for another one. It will not take 1, 2, 3 months before another raid is conducted, either in Western Lakes or in Rumbek areas or in Tonj, or even the same Murles will attack again the West. So it is something that is going on and on non-stop for as long as there is no clear strategy from the government to address it. Now, and that means also continuous suffering of the livelihoods who are of the Murle, the Nuer, the Dinka, and whoever is affected, because of all these killings that do not appear to have any sign of stopping. Now, with respect to our region, particularly the Ethiopia, you see the practice and the impact is similar, because the Murle, for example, will go all the way to Ethiopia and abduct children and take animals. That means they are causing the same pain, the same losses, the same impact that they cause to the other communities around. So it is really not something that is different. The only difference is that because they have gone across the borders. And this one definitely is not good because it affects bilateral relations between South Sudan and Ethiopia. And if you may recall, some 2 years back, the Murles went and abducted children from the Anuak community of Ethiopia. And that forced the Ethiopian government to organize a force to come deep into South Sudan, up to Pebor, to retrieve these children who were abducted. Yet, and again, this is a confirmation to my argument that the state is non-existent because it had to take the Ethiopian government, a foreign government, to come all the way into the territory of South Sudan and rescue these children who are abducted by the Murle and return them back together with all the animals. The government of South Sudan could not do anything because the government actually is non-existent. And if it exists, and then it only exists in name, and it is only in Juba, they cannot do anything because it confirms my argument that we are yet to become a nation state. It's not there. There's no authority. So people act, and I can assure you this will not stop because the Murle, the Nuer, and the Dinkas know that since there is no proper government to hold them accountable for any action, then they will continue to do that. I have nothing to bet, but I bet that the Murle will go and look for children and animals from across the borders in Ethiopia. They will attack, they will take the children, and then it will be up to our brothers in Ethiopia to take action like what they did 2 years ago. But if they rely on the government, the so-called government in South Sudan, then that's the end of the road. Because even in Juba, people are dying, people are being killed, and they now have a vocabulary known as unknown gunmen. And these unknown gunmen are there. They kill people even within the city, and nobody, no single criminal has ever, at least to the best of my knowledge, since we become independent, there is no single criminal who has been held to account in Juba, in the court of law. I've never heard that, including those who were arrested with full evidence, yet the government is indecisive. The government could not, the so-called government could not decide and punish these people in order to restrain others from acting in the same way. That has not happened. That tells me that actually there is no authority. Because if people can be killed and nobody comes to ask for accountability, then there is not only impunity, but there is anarchy in this kind of situation. So still, it takes me back to my conclusion. And whoever wants to project an antithesis of my argument, I think he or she will have it difficult to disprove me, because these are some of the facts that confirm our arguments. If the Ethiopian government had to be the one, instead of asking Juba, if there was any authority in Juba, that look, your people have come and they've looted their people, please return our people back. Or if you don't return our people back, then we will not be happy, which would have then affect bilateral relations or diplomatic relations. But because I think Ethiopia is fully aware that there is no government in Juba that has the capacity to act in that way, they decided to come and then return all the children and all the animals, because the government that claims to be in power does not have the authority, doesn't have the teeth, it does not have the idea that they are in charge of the security of their own population. So yes, it affects diplomatically, but then perhaps I will actually appreciate I will take this opportunity to appreciate the Ethiopian government for having come to rescue those innocent children and women who were abducted by our unruly communities who do not know anything about borders. So that's what I have by way of
Well,
answering.
thank you, Lemi. I think it is good effort by the Ethiopian authorities to rescue some, not all of them, if I may say, because there are still 165 Anuak children who are still missing that the Ethiopian government has not made effort to rescue them or to actually reach out to South Sudan government, of which you are very well aware that it is not going to be an easy thing for them to deal with those group of people who are crossing the border and taking or abducting children. This intercommunal conflict, as we discussed, is very common in Upper Nile, Jungule, and also Greater Pibor. How is this violent intercommunal conflict relevant or existence in other states? For instance, Equatoria pre-Kokra or even after Kokra is well known for peaceful coexistence with the community. Does this still holds after the independence?
I think the case in Equatoria is slightly different with respect to the issue of rustling. Yes, actually, I think there is no part of South Sudan that is not affected by cattle rustling, except maybe small areas. But in Equatoria, cattle rustling is limited to Eastern Equatoria. Eastern Equatoria is part of the east of the Equatoria that is east of the Nile, what is today known as Torit State. In Torit State, we have pastoralists and semi-pastoralists. The Latukas are both pastoralists and agriculturalists, and the Langos. But we also have the Toposa, the Boya, and the Didinga, who often carry out raids among themselves. But their extent of cattle rustling, by comparison to other parts of South Sudan, is low. For example, there is frequent cattle rustling between Toposa and Turkana in Kenya, across the borders. But there is also cattle rustling between the Dinga and Karamojo in Uganda. But this one sometimes happens once in a year or in 2 years. It's not something that is so frequent. Now, cattle rustling between Toposa, Boya, and Latuka has reduced significantly, especially during the war, because that was where the SPLM government was headquartered, in the mountains. And so people have learned to live together. Besides that, it's not difficult to trace animals that are raided by a particular community because of proximity. They are not far. For example, the Buya and the Toposa share their water points. So if one community takes animals from the other side, it's not very difficult to trace them and return them back. And then the same thing also with the Latukas and the Didingas. So yes, this practice is all over. I can say it is universal in terms of South Sudan. as a country, but with only pockets of areas that are mainly agricultural areas. For example, central Equatoria, only part of, I think, northern central Equatoria, where you have the Mundari, who are pastoralists. But so far, we have not heard of the Mundari engaging in cattle rustling with the Dinkas, for example. The rest of central and western Equatoria, all the way to the borders of Congo, Central Africa, and upwards, are pure farmers. They engage in farming. They don't have a lot of animals, and therefore those areas are very quiet. It is only now that a new problem is emerging, and this is a problem of migration by pastoralists, mainly from Barghazal and Upper Nile, who have decided to move with their cattle because of a number of reasons. One is insecurity. The other is that they just feel that those places are, since those people are farmers, so they want to move their animals and then graze them in Equatoria. And this is creating a new dimension to the issue of cattle in South Sudan. A lot of Dinkas from Barghazal and Upper Nile have moved into Equatoria with their animals, and which has created now a new problem, a new crisis. Because as they move with their animals, they are not only displacing people, but they are also consuming their crops, because they have difficulty, pastoralists have difficulties in controlling their animals eating crops of the people. So that's a new dimension which is emerging, and it's going to be a very serious one, if it is not already a serious one. And but yes, it has nothing to do with cattle rustling. So coming back to your question, yes, cattle rustling is universal. It happens in almost every part of South Sudan, and that is what it is up to today. That means if there is any solution, it has to be a national strategy, a solution that is nationally designed, approved, and accepted by everybody through consensus, and then people come out with a concrete policy that addresses the issue of rustling and child abduction.
Thank you, Lemi. Lemi, I think a new norm is emerging among the Nilotic communities. As you clearly stated earlier on, this intercommunal community is as old as the human existence in South Sudan. But the scale and the problem is not as much as we see today. What seems to be new, though, is the fact that in among the communities in South Sudan, the Nilotic in particular, I think there is no savage killing of women, killing of children, killing of the vulnerables and the elderly. Is this a new norm, or what went wrong exactly? Is it a cultural decay or social decay?
To be honest, Nika, I think I will have difficulty in explaining exactly what could be the causes of the change in the attitudes and the feelings of people. Why, for example, all of a sudden people have decided now to kill people, kill children and kill women. I think it is a kind of escalation or exacerbation of the fighting that has always taken place between these communities. Remember, these raids have been going on for too long. And if there are individuals among the raiding communities who have lost their wives, their children in the past, then such individuals are likely to revenge. So that when they have opportunity of raiding the other community, they will then decide not to spare the lives of women and children because they too had lost their own in the past. It could be a kind of a revenge, but to be honest, I don't have specific explanation for why a change, why all of a sudden, because historically or traditionally, we know that normally women and children are only abducted. They are not killed. They are normally captured and taken alive because those uh, 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 raiders would want to benefit from the children as well as the women. The women will go and produce more children, and the children that are taken alive would grow up to complement their own manpower. But at the moment, this one, as you correctly said, seems to be changing. Women are being killed, children are being killed, and to be honest, I have no explanation. Maybe one needs to spend time and do some research, whether to find out whether there is a change in culture or this is a kind of a revenge thing that is taking place. I don't know. But what I know is that the grievances that have been developed over time in history have always remained the same. And the motivations and the intentions of all Rasta communal fighters and cattle rustling have always remained the same. It is wealth, it is fighting over land, it is revenge killings, and it's the desire for animals for their bride price, and then many others. But to be honest, maybe that question can be take home question, so I can be able to find out why this is happening. But for now, I don't think I really have an answer as to why all of a sudden women too and children are being killed instead of being taken alive.
Well, thank you, Lemi. As we conclude, I think this intercommunal conflict in the country, in South Sudan, seems to be taking the country back to the old days. There is no progress in social activity. There is no progress in social cohesion among different communities. Farmers cannot undertake their activities. People also cannot freely go and hunt, cannot freely go and fish, and do other necessary livelihood activities. What do you think can be done, both from the government side, civil society, from religious groups, and other actors in South Sudan and also outside?
In my opinion, Nikau, the answers lies in addressing the issue of the absence of the state. For as long as South Sudan remains in anarchy, for as long as South Sudan remains in the state of nature, where the laws of nature are the ones that govern people, and people by their nature are selfish, they will always do whatever they want for themselves. For as long as there is no supreme authority that can impose law and order and protect the people, for as long as people of South Sudan remain exclusively separated from themselves due to lack of infrastructure, there's no communication, there are no roads, there is nothing completely. Pibor, for example, is only accessed 3 months a year during dry season only. The rest of the year, nobody can go to Pibor except by air. So people are separated, and for as long as we remain in this anarchy, this chaos, there will be no easy answer to solution of communal violence. Yes, the people who are currently only cohabiting, living in a geographical territory called South Sudan, yet this territory does not have the supreme authority to govern them. The civil society and everybody else, yes, will have the answers only if they are granted that opportunity to sit down, discuss these issues, agree on how to govern themselves, agree that they should be able to surrender their liberty to a supreme authority that will be able to impose law and order and protect the people. If all these are not done in a convention or what I would call a national constitutional process, where people will have open discussion and exchange views and reach consensus to evolve a new dispensation, a new socio-political dispensation that has a supreme law that can be respected by everybody. And it is that law that will have the authority, having secured that authority through consent of the people in a contract agreed between the people and the authority. I can assure you these problems will not stop. They will continue to be there. Because as we speak, South Sudanese are only cohabiting. There are groups, they are independent nations. They are independent nations within the country. They are yet to come together and believe and embrace an identity called South Sudan as a country. In other words, in a nutshell, it is the absence of this nation state that is yet to evolve that will need to be addressed. And it can be addressed by all this, by the society, the civil societies, the churches, and everybody who is affected will have to be part of that convention or national constitution conference or whatever. We could call it national dialogue, where people will come up with the concrete definition of their status as a people and agree on how to move forward. Only then will these problems stop.
Thank you, Lemi. I think we are almost concluding our show. If there is any other comments or message that you would want to send to those groups who are financing, encouraging, and organizing this intercommunal community, and also for the viewers, what they would want to take home with them.
First, I want to thank the viewers for having taken that time off and listen to us, which is very important because I believe this is one way to address these problems through exchange of ideas and views, and then through discussing all these problems, that's when we can be able to resolve them. Secondly, my message to the people of South Sudan, and particularly those who regard themselves as being in authority, to seriously begin to address the issue of the building of the state, of the country, by initiating discussions, conversations about why South Sudanese are still suffering after almost 100 years of fighting against the Arabs. The people of South Sudan must begin to ask themselves, why are we still killing ourselves? If it is the animals, they are ours. If it is the land, it is ours. The water is ours. The grass is ours. The women and children are our own children. So why should we die? Why should we kill ourselves? We all know this is an archaic, traditional, outdated practice. But then, can't we stop it? And the question is, how do we stop it? So our people of South Sudan must begin to initiate and engage in discussions on how we can be able to define ourselves and move forward so that we have a state that will be created as a result of our consensus, as a result of our agreement, so that we can be able to surrender our liberty, our freedoms, this freedom to rape, the freedom to kill without being questioned, freedom to loot, freedom to abduct children. So we surrender these freedoms to that authority, which we call state, so that we can be able to be protected by the state. And until we engage in these discussions, until we engage in conversations that will lead eventually to a national convention or a national constitutional conference that brings all people of all walks of life in South Sudan to discuss, we will not be able to move forward. So it is time for people to begin about this, begin thinking about this, and then we can be able to move forward. Otherwise, that is my appeal, particularly to those who are in authority, to begin thinking about it. Also, those politicians who always take advantage of the situation and begin to manipulate their communities should desist from that, because in doing so, they are causing harm. They are killing their people. They are actually destroying the country by mobilizing your communities for political purposes, by mobilizing your people to go and fight others so that you can gain some political leverage. It's wrong. So it must stop. It must stop. The so-called government should not go and beg people. Don't go and beg people who are fighting. People are holding guns. A government must take concrete action by subjecting criminals to the court of law, to face due process of law, so that if somebody is found guilty of having orchestrated cattle rustling or killing or abduction, that individual or those individuals should then be subjected to a disciplinary process. If it requires that some of them must be executed, then be it. Because after all, we're not the first that we started this. In fact, human beings don't listen. If you don't shoot them, they don't hear. They don't listen. So shoot some few. Take some few criminals, get the hell out of them, and then stop all this cattle rustling. If you shoot 2-3 people of the Murule or the Bargadal people, they will stop. It may not stop immediately, but over time they will come to know that it is dangerous for them to go and abduct children and kill some other people and then get away with it. So government must have authority to impose the law, not to go and kneel down in front of people and begging them to put down their guns. That will not work. It is wrong. It should not be done. It should not have happened. And it must stop. That is my message, my brother Nikau.
Thank you, Brother Lemi. I think that is a military order. Shoot them so that they can learn. Listen, that is from the General Lemi.
I tell you, they give me the opportunity, they will not regret. They will not regret at all.
Yeah, thank you, Lemi, for your time. I think it has been a pleasure to have you on the show. And as usual, you have always been very insightful to give your thoughts about the situations in South Sudan. Until next time, then we will bring this show to conclusion. Viewers, our show with General Lemi, we have concluded here. So South Sudan needs peace. South Sudan needs development. South Sudan also needs social cohesion so that people can live as one people. So for those of you who are joining us, I think this is an interesting discussion with General Lemi. I'm sure for those of you also who are going to watch this clip, I'm sure you will take away a very important message with regard to the causes of intercommunal conflict in South Sudan and how also this situation can be brought to control without affecting further children, women, and elderly people, the vulnerable in general. So with this, I will bring this conclusion, this show to an end. Then I will invite you with this music, which says that Anataban. Thank you.
جنوبين كل يوم موت موت لمتين يا اخوانا نقول سلام سلام 200 السلام ده يجي يلدونا في هروب ونربي في هروب وكمان نموت في هروب لكل جنوبي يموت قطعة من جنوبنا بيموت نجري ل200 ولوين ندي يالنا وندي ارواحنا وندي دمنا فضل شنو تاني انا تعبان
أنا ما شعبان لكن أنا بس تعبان أنا ما فرحان لكن أنا بس فتران أنا ما سكران لكن أنا بس كسران أنا ما كسران لكن أنا بس سكران
Saint P, we that beat.
وهدى وسلام مفروض يكون مفهوم يا في الجنوب ده سلا يكون حاجة مواطني ما يشوف يا بنية بونجوز يابا حبوبة حاجات ما بنفع في الجنوب ده قبلية جوا انظرية جوا كرهية جوا قلب كبير جوا فساد جوا نغمة حاجات الناس جوا دو 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 بويا صوت باشا في جيدة باب البازوكا جري جري لبتين جنوبيين قاعدين في كامبالا نيروبي UN أمريكا أستراليا سبين أي روكو دا دنيا جنوبي في لي وبلتانا طلع no wisdom why sound the gun redundant like a hit song I'm feeling so tired أنا تعبان
أنا تعبان من جري جري أنا تعبان من كاتولو أنا تعبان من كايمانتيان أنا تعبان من مشاكل تعبان 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 Lemi tenisa fijere أنا كمان فيجري تلقى ملاوتها تلقى ملاوتها وسوا سكا باتنا جيران أنا تعبان مشاكل كربو بلد تعالي النور بيرفع بلد
موت كل يوم في تلفون جنوب تانينا كربو نينا مالو دوم كوبو أكو ياو كاتولو أنا تعبان في شنو
أنا مواتي جنوبي بسي Insan, we got a kiss. Si an, we got lakin ana best taban.
Listen to a prayer.
Ana ma farhan, lakin ana best fataran.